Good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Powell. I'm going to talk to you guys a little about Thanksgiving today. So Thanksgiving, as we know it today, most of us, is a very American tradition. I mean, just thinking of Thanksgiving brings images of watching football on the TV, family reunions, stuffing our faces with turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, and afterwards a food coma. But it wasn't always like that, which kind of makes sense since football hasn't been around for that long. But why? So what did it used to be like? Well, sometimes what I don't always think of is where it started, which is Pilgrims and Wampanoag Indians, and when they had that first Thanksgiving. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the history of that and how that came to be. So the Indians, they would give thanks to God for successful harvests, and they would have celebrations and ceremonies for things that don't really seem like they're that important, just general good fortune, when a child was born, stuff like that. So it wasn't just like Thanksgiving once a year. They would kind of just do it whenever they felt the need to. And the Pilgrims weren't too different. They would give thanks to God for beautiful harvests and stuff like that too. So when you think of it like that, they were kind of celebrating almost the same thing when they came together that day. So while their beliefs weren't exactly the same, it was pretty close. However, there is some debate as to if that was actually the first Thanksgiving. So Florida, Texas, Maine, and Virginia all claim that they had the first Thanksgiving too. And the funny thing is there's actually evidence to support that, which kind of makes me think of how did the Pilgrims get the credit for it. But the reason that is because they weren't. It wasn't really that well known. So Spanish explorers and the English colonists, they would celebrate Thanksgiving years before the Mayflower even arrived. But it didn't really get put out there, so not many people actually knew that they were celebrating that stuff. But the reason that the Pilgrims and the Indians, their celebration, got so popular was because it was a letter from one of the Pilgrims, actually. His name was Edward Winslow. And basically he was sending a letter back to his family, and he was talking about, God be praised, we're so thankful for our harvest and stuff. And then he kind of just described what happened in the rejoicing and all that stuff with the Indians. And then in 1622, so that's 1 year after the celebration, that was in 1621. So 1 year after that, without his consent, actually, his letter got published in a pretty well-known pamphlet or newspaper kind of thing. And that was the first published writing of Thanksgiving. So that's really how that got to be well-known, and it kind of rolled on from there. So that it kind of became a tradition. After people were reading that, they kind of liked the idea of it. And at that point, religion was a huge part of the culture. So people were all into giving thanks to God. But by the 1700s, family really overshadowed what the true purpose was when they first got together that day. So it was more about just family coming together, kind of like how we have it today. And in 1777, so we're like a little over 100 years after the first celebration, in 1777 is right after the U.S. kind of became a country, so Congress proclaimed the first national Thanksgiving in our country. So that was kind of a big point, and the first presidents would all have to proclaim a national Thanksgiving. It wasn't just an annual thing; they would have to proclaim it each year. But that kind of fell out of the custom, and then it became more of a state-to-state thing where the states would choose whether or not they would have Thanksgiving. But most of the states did, and so that went on for a long time. But a lot of people kind of missed Thanksgiving being a national thing. And this woman, her name was Sarah Hale, and at this time, women didn't have a whole lot of power. But this woman was pretty well known. She was a popular editor of a woman's magazine that was really popular. So she had a little bit of popularity and a little bit of power, and she would campaign against all the presidents until finally Abraham Lincoln was the president, and she got him to understand that Thanksgiving would really help the country because they were going through the Civil War at the time, so it would really help to unite the war-torn country. And they actually had two Thanksgivings that year. One was in August, and one was in November. But that was the only time there was ever really two national Thanksgivings. So after Abraham Lincoln did it, the presidents would start proclaiming it every year again as a national holiday. But they would have to do that every year. It wasn't something that happened automatically. And so that happened all the way until 1941, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt convinced Congress that they should make it permanent. And that's kind of where we are today. So in all of that, we kind of lost the whole thing about the Pilgrims. So what happened to that? Why did that kind of get less popular? And so as the article I was reading went on to say, it wasn't really identified, the Pilgrims and stuff weren't really identified with it until the year 1900, where interest in the 1621 celebration started to grow. And it became more of a story just to teach kids about getting along with other people who aren't necessarily the same beliefs as you, and freedom and stuff like that, which I remember because I learned about that in school too. But as for today, there's really one day a year when food and family are the number one thing, takes precedence over everything else. And just a fun fact about it, the Sunday after is the busiest travel day in the U.S., which kind of shows how important Thanksgiving is to our country. And there's 10 million people who fly on that Sunday after Thanksgiving, which is why the prices are so high, which I'm finding out as I'm traveling to see family. But 40 million people will even drive 100 miles just for the Thanksgiving. So it's clearly something that's important to our country. Just to wrap up here, I just want to say, let's not forget 400 years ago in Plymouth, when the two cultures came together and shared this feast. And we should always remember that about Thanksgiving. Thank you for listening.